Mage Storytime, Episode 20. Let the Buyer Beware. This is the continuing story of the Iron Goldfish, a party of role-players who awakened as mages. Our cast includes Alwi, who manipulates time with his foe; Bard, a mind and spirit mage who uses superheroes as his gods; Critical, who improves the luck of others through his own pain; Handy, a correspondence-using thief who steals items at long range; Kitty, who empowers his stickers and cats with spirits; Tello, a postmodern mage who uses a hodgepodge of skills to manipulate forces and matter; and Weeb, who uses his life skills to enhance his martial arts and Chinese medicine. As we stood in our storefront base, the members of the Iron Goldfish all jumped when our telephone began to ring. This might seem odd for a store, but we had never received a phone call before. In fact, we weren't even certain we had listed this number. So it was with some trepidation that Alwi reached over, picked up the receiver, and hit speakerphone. Iron Goldfish. Oh good, it's you guys. This is the Bone Gnawers. Oh cool, are we friends now? Don't get ahead of yourself, champ. But we got something you might could help us out with. The semi-friendly, or at least not overtly antagonistic, werewolves proceeded to tell us about a coven of what they described as evil witches that were trying to buy the node that we had previously cleared of vampire-run convenience stores, with explosives. They had been squatting on the node, as it was part of nature, when this group came in and bought the land out from under them. Since they weren't as skilled with legal dealings, they opted to call us and have us deal with the problem. While we were talking, Alwi and Handy started to make a deal with the wolves, offering to buy the property, so no one else could. Then we and they could jointly use and protect the node. We even offered to build a little nature garden on it and keep the node whole and untainted. Given that we had a lot more funding than the pack, hooray for alchemy. The wolves thought it was a pretty good plan. They gave us directions to the Coven's main base, which turned out to be an old witch shop in central Dallas, and then hung up with the expectation of hearing from us, or hearing some explosions, soon. We tossed around some ideas of how to deal with this group, which a bit of research suggested was probably a verbena coven, as they seemed the most likely to be described as witches. Critical suggested solving the issue with fire, as was our wont. Of course, the chorister wanted to burn the witch. Weeb suggested we actually try to talk to them, and if things went sideways, we could always self-defense them to death. Without any better ideas, we just decided to go to the Coven's shop to do some preliminary reconnaissance. Upon arriving, we discovered that the shop was a converted house on the border between a shopping and residential district. It had 3 main rooms arranged like a shotgun shack, with what was presumably storerooms leading off to the sides. The front room had the cash register and various crystals, the middle room had books and candles, and the back had a bunch of herbs and spices. The whole place smelled vaguely of patchouli. All in all, it was a typical magic shop, and the 3 people working there seemed fairly normal. There were 2 middle-aged women at the front with friendly demeanors, while a tall, scruffy guy with graying hair and a beard that we heard the women call satyr stocked herbs in the back. Since it was the middle of a weekday, we were the only people in the place, and our attempts to browse and appear innocuous didn't really disguise the fact that we were clearly a unified group and clearly had something specific in mind. Still, the clerks were polite until we started to introduce ourselves. We gave the coded phrase that indicated our magey ways, and began to put out feelers about potent artifacts or aids that might be for sale. The workers perked up a bit at that, but didn't have anything especially powerful, just some common ingredients. Some small talk about the magical community ensued, and when one of the 2 ladies introduced themselves as Vern and her partner Cheryl, we introduced ourselves as the Iron Goldfish. That seemed to interest the women more than anything, and even the guy in the back raised his head. They said they had heard of us through the grapevine, and we preened a little bit as they asked if we had a member named Weeb. Weeb, who had been doing the most of the talking to that point, as he's a very convivial and sociable fellow, introduced himself, and Vern said that they knew a girl from Portland, where he had lived previously, as a mutual acquaintance. Apparently it was one of Weeb's exes, and things hadn't ended too well, but we hoped that wouldn't mar our apparently budding friendship with these verbena. It did. Things started to turn south when, after chatting about their mutual friend, Vern offered Weeb and the rest of us a cup of tea. Critical and Handy were tea snobs and decided to forego the house blend, but the rest of us were parched. She offered several different flavors, ultimately enticing Handy, but Critical began to get suspicious about the persistence of the witches. He was right to be wary, as the tea was drugged. Unfortunately for the suddenly hostile witches, the drugs didn't really seem to bother us. Kitty and Handy only had a sip before they caught on, so they were able to shrug off the pharmaceuticals. Weeb dropped into a kata and, channeling his life and forces magic, started to steam all over as he purged the toxins from his system with the power of flame. For his part, Bard just did a lot of recreational narcotics of the leafy green variety and had the heart and stomach of a concrete elephant. He took a full cup of the drug tea, blinked rapidly for a minute, then asked for another cup. The only one truly affected was Alwi, who was a notorious lightweight. One drink, and while his body was still present, his mind was on one hell of a trip. Seeing the drugs fail to take hold, as well as the mage lighting himself on fire, Seder decided to capitalize on what elements of surprise was left. He ran up behind Weeb and tried to hit him with a blackjack. The martial artist responded by dodging out of the way, and those of us still sober, or at least functional in Bard's case, prepared to resort to violence. Cheryl, standing behind the counter, grabbed a vial of neon liquid and tried to splash it at Weeb, but he did a different move and, with an effort of will, transmogrified the liquid to a handful of snow, which fell on him harmlessly. Vern shouted, "Bast! Get the drunken one for our sacrifice!" And a black figure darted out from one of the stockrooms, grabbed Alwi, and began to carry him to the next room. Seeing this, Bard summoned his superhero totem with a cry of, "Wisdom of Solomon!" A lightning bolt struck him, and when the smoke cleared, Bard was visibly bulkier, in addition to his red suit and white half-cape. Then Kitty surreptitiously stuck a sticker on him, and he swelled to the size and color of a green rage monster, with other superpowers. He moved super speedily in pursuit of Alwi and his abductor as they ducked through a beaded curtain into a storeroom. Not to be outdone, Weeb dropped into a special martial arts stance that he had invented. His muscles tensed, he focused his chi, and in the space of a blink he swelled to over twice his normal width, and gained a few feet in height, becoming a wall of solid science fiction muscle. He had invented Astartes Fu, and the poor women in the shop were about to feel the full brunt of it. Actually, the old guy named Seder felt it first, and was sent flying through the open door and the not open wall beyond it. While the melee fighters dealt damage, Handy magically sent his mind into the room where Alwi had been taken so we didn't charge straight into a trap. There he saw Alwi being carried by a tall, black woman. Well, her hair was black. There was no way to tell what her ethnicity was because of the fur covering her entire body. Also, her breasts were exposed, and she had a cat head. That was definitely a feature that Handy noticed, after the breasts. As Handy watched, a drugged and horny Alwi also noticed the chesticles and reached out to touch someone. The groping could probably have been excused by the drugs, but the honking noise Alwi made was totally inappropriate. The Catwoman yowled and scratched his face, leaving deep furrows that turned Alwi into a tic-tac-toe board. Fortunately, he was too high to notice. Seeing that things were not going as planned, the Verbena Coven decided that discretion was the better part of valor and began pulling back toward another of the employee doors leading off to the side. Vern called out, "Cheryl, we're leaving! Bast, let's go!" The party jumped to the conclusion that they had some sort of escape, possibly magical, waiting for them. This assumption was reinforced by Seder struggling back inside through the hole and making his way painfully towards the door. Whatever was in there had to provide a better out than he had already had outside the building. On the plus side, the party was between their furry companion and her hostage and the exit, so there was a good chance we would get to keep our Alwi, even if the others got away. Not that we intended to let them get away. The Catwoman, who apparently was Bast, tried to rely on her speed to run our gauntlet. Weeb swung at her and felt the rub of her fur, but she just barely dodged out of his path. Bard tried his hand and managed to connect with a strike to the stomach, but the woman rode the punch and flipped aside with feline grace, her hostage still in hand and apparently no worse for wear. Even Critical missed, his enhanced luck doing him no good this once. All us big, powerful, manly men stood around looking sheepish for a moment at our complete lack of success. Seeing our comrade about to vanish into the doorway, possibly forever, Bard rushed over for another attempt, and this time managed to hit her. He only barely connected, but he was super powerful enough that the damage was done, and there was probably some internal bruising on his feline victim. But she didn't drop Alwee. Cheryl was not nearly as agile as the Catwoman. Instead, she grabbed a crystal from the counter and stabbed it at Handy, who was closest to her. Later, he told us that the touch made him feel sick somehow, and he could see her perk up a bit. In retaliation, he opened a portal in the ceiling and dropped a bowling ball on her head. Or he would have, but his aim was off, so he hit a bookshelf, causing the bowling ball to roll down the sudden incline, knock over a book, which had a bell, and 5 minutes later, Handy's breakfast was made in true Rube Goldbergian fashion. After watching the progress for a moment, Weeb, in his 800-pound Space Marine form, reached out and grabbed Cheryl around the torso, his hand covering a sizable portion of her body, then began to rip the life force from her directly. He'd show her how you drain someone's life. In his best booming warrior voice, Weeb told her, "Stand down and surrender, fool. You do not know who you're dealing with." Gauging by the spreading stain on the woman's pants, it was effective, and she quickly stopped struggling and started crying. Weeb still didn't let her go. While we were occupied in the front room, Satyr limped his way into the side room they were retreating towards, and we heard a strange noise as he disappeared. The party started to close in to rescue Alwee, but he struggled out of the Catwoman's grip and started drunkenly mumbling, Guys, it's cool. She's taking me back to her place. Don't cockblock me." This gave us all pause, and Bard turned to the furred woman and asked, "Wait, what are his chances? Like, does he have a shot?" We all waited as Bass considered, willing to let our bro risk his safety and sanity in an attempt to get laid. The hirsute woman looked at the smiling Alwee, then yowled her disgust. Alwee took that as meaning yes and went for a hug, only to get scratched again, albeit less harshly this time, which must mean she really liked him after all. The things that happen when we don't have Tello around for adult supervision. Taking advantage of our distraction, Vern pulled a gun from out of nowhere and took a shot at Weeb, yelling at him to let go of her woman. Weeb simply jerked his head out of the way with freakish, transhuman speed and gave her a contemptuous look. Bard lunged for Bast, and she, too, dodged out of the way with inhuman speed. She wasn't as lucky, or maybe tactically aware, as Weeb, however, and ducked straight into the path of critical swinging blackjack, which conked her on the head. As the Catwoman slumped to the ground and released our comrade, she started to fade from existence. Bard later told us that he could tell she was some sort of goddess and had probably returned to the spirit world. Alwee, meanwhile, decided that his contact with a cat goddess made him the new Black Panther. Bard sent out a call to the spirit world, and the real deal found the idea hilarious, if a little insulting. That night, Alwee had a strange dream wherein the Black Panther appeared and kicked his ass, walking away with a "Black Panther this, white boy." Alwee decided it was training, which perseverance impressed the spirit of Afrofuturism, gaining him a new ally. Critical, having disposed of one antagonist, turned to Vern, the only one left standing, and in a stentorian voice laid a geesh on her, a magical obligation or compulsion that she was forced to obey. For his part, Critical simply commanded her to stand down and quit fighting, and she did, plopping to the floor in a sitting position with her hands in the air. And with that, the fight was over. One foe escaped, one dispatched, and 2 captured. Not bad. All things considered, we were pretty gentle towards our captives. We calmly explained that we had come in peace and only wanted to talk to them about the purchase of a land where the node was. We weren't their enemies and had no idea why they attacked us. After some angry glaring, Vern and Cheryl came clean that their mutual friend, Weeb's ex, had put out a clandestine hit on him for reasons. "Hey, she left me!" Weeb shouted. We decided not to press the issue, although we did ask him to warn us about any other sorcerous, vengeful exes he might have lurking around. They had heard Weeb ran with a group called the Iron Goldfish, and when we showed up, they saw an opportunity to take him, or anyone from our group, for a ritual sacrifice. Something about killing someone and burying them in the foundation of a new building as a spectral guardian. We informed them they could just ask the spirits nicely, like we did. We asked them how their attempts at killing us had worked out, and they admitted not too well. Vern promised to make a call and have the hit cancelled, if only for the safety of her peers who might cross someone who could turn into a space marine. On that point, we weren't actually that mad about the attempt on our lives, given how laughable their efforts had been compared to the magical weight we could throw around. If anything, we were upset about how badly they'd screwed it up. We'd spent several minutes berating them for poor choice of targets, and for failing to do any basic research. Although he did say he wasn't mad, just disappointed. We weren't exactly subtle, and had even earned a bit of a rep, so why in God's name would they try to attack us of all people? Honestly, said Churl, we kinda heard you guys were idiots. Joke's on you, we're sociopaths, replied Critical. They conceded his point and decided that maybe in the future they would do some reconnaissance, so they didn't try to take on a squad that had space marines, superheroes, and serial arsonists in its ranks. An impromptu lecture was also given about why sacrificing random strangers in blood rituals was not nice. Considering a space marine and a green rage monster were delivering said lecture, between sips of special tea for Bard, it carried some weight. We decided that, as punishment for their stupidity, they were going to have to sell us the node land they had purchased, and maybe a few tins of that tea for recreational use. Considering that Weeb and Bard were still in their swole forms and had just proved a willingness and ability to do them harm, they were quick to agree. Prices were haggled, paperwork was drawn up, lawyers circled overhead, we contacted our vampire accountants, and soon a deal was struck. As we left, they again apologized for trying to kill us and promised not to do it again. We felt sure that, if nothing else, they would bring more people next time. But that was okay with us. Who will the Iron Goldfish meet next? Why will the next group try to kill them? Will their attempts at diplomacy ever succeed? Find out in the next Mage Storytime.